So the title of my talk is Clarity, Design Encounters at the Edge of the World, and that's a subtitle that I ripped off of Werner Herzog. And it kind of gives an idea of some of the different designs that we're going to look at. Really like wild, extreme things on the extreme ends of complexity and simplicity. So since we're going to be looking at some really strange stuff, I think it would be good to start out with a very basic example of good design to give us a touchstone that we can look back to as we go through the talk. So there's a small iPhone app that you might have seen called Nest. And when I saw it come out, I was really struck by how amazing the logo design was for it. And I emailed them and I never got a response back. But then I Googled for it, and this company called Moving Brands, they had done a write-up on how they came out with this logo. And really great work. One of the most surprising things about what they did with the logo is that it doesn't look like it was just the work of one person. Like, it really looks like it was a team effort inside Moving Brands. And that's really unusual because I typically think of really good design as coming from maybe one person or from a pair of really good people. And so here are some early designs that they had on the route to the finished product. And you can see they've already kind of pinned down what they want to have in the finished thing. They've settled on the heart, and they want to kind of split it radially into triangles and give it hard edges. And there on the grid is what I assume is a near miss. Like, that's a pretty good logo. Like, that would do well in the App Store, but it's maybe not quite the caliber of the final product. So here's the finished thing. I mean, I really think this is a thing of beauty. Like, I think this logo is really amazing. You can see what they're doing. Like, they're mixing concepts like love and the heart with hard geometric technological things. And there's kind of some colored pencil shading going on. And this actually isn't the first version that they released. This is a later version. And you can see they've added noise there on the right side. So really just a gorgeous logo. That font at the bottom is called Rhythmic, and they picked it especially for this thing. Is there anybody from Moving Brands here tonight? No? So, one not particularly good definition of design is the veneer definition of design. And that's just to talk about that everything that you layer on top of the essential functionality. And that's what Steve Jobs called the veneer definition of design. And that's not usually how we want to think about design. We want to think of it in the sense of incorporating the choices we make about the essential functionality. And that bad definition of design also happens to be what the US patent system uses for design. And we'll get back to that later. So sometimes people get it in their heads that simple design is good and complex design is bad. But that's not really true. Good design is good and bad design is bad. And complexity is only partially related to it. So an example of something that's really complex and difficult to deal with is the Hadoop project, which works wonderfully at what it's designed to do. But one of the things that it wasn't designed to do was be terribly user-friendly. It's for technologists. Something that's really easy to use is the Stripe service. And this is a service that allows you to process credit cards on your site. And from the very beginning, they designed Stripe to be easy to use. That's really big into the core product. And if you look at this ad that I've copied from their site, that's a curl one-liner that you can paste into your terminal and right away get started on processing credit card payments. So this guy is Fred Brooks, and some of you might know him. He's famous for a lot of different stuff. He's won the Turing Award, he wrote The Mythical Man Month. And in 1986, he put out a book called No Silver Bullet. And I'd like to read a quote from No Silver Bullet. It says, "Much of the complexity the programmer must master is arbitrary complexity, forced without rhyme or reason by the many human institutions and systems to which its interfaces must conform." And what Fred Brooks is talking about there is kind of the veneer in development. And in development, the veneer is much less valuable. In design, you can kind of get away with having added on stuff be interesting, but in development, it just really soaks up time. And so having introduced this idea of complexity and simplicity in design, it might be helpful to take a look at some examples of really extreme complexity. What can you do if you go out of your way to make something difficult to understand? And fortunately, there's this thing called the International Obfuscated C Code Contest. And the point of this contest is to write programs that are impossible to understand. And so this is actually a program that generates mazes. And after the guy wrote his program to generate mazes, he went through and he chained all the functions together in weird ways and renamed the variables weird things. Just had to do all sorts of crazy stuff. And then when he was done, he went through and replaced all the tokens with A's and G's and C's and T's, like in a real DNA strand, and then finally munged it into this DNA strand that you see. So it's kind of cool of him. Here's another example from the obfuscated C code contest. This is an airplane, and it's actually an X Windows program, right? So this is working C code. And if you run your C compiler on this code and execute the binary, what you get is a working flight simulator. So this is me, I'm controlling this, and I'm flying over the Pittsburgh skyline. And there I did a barrel roll. Cool. All right, one more example from the obfuscated C code contest. This blob of text generates magic eyes. So raise your hand if you remember what a magic eye is. Okay. Yeah, it was really big in the 90s. Like if you were to come up to the screen and cross your eyes, you can see like a 3D image. And so if you run this program on strings, it generates magic eye pictures, like remarkably. Like it's impossible to believe that this actually works. But what's especially interesting about this is that it's actually a magic eye itself. So if you came up to the screen, and crossed your eyes, and you can do this later, like it sort of looks like this. This is the best approximation I can give for how a magic eye works, which is helpful for people who can't do it. Cool. So those are some crazy examples in one language, which is C. And not everybody knows C. So now let's take a look at some examples in a language that everybody knows, which is English. And so I'll quote a professor from the Midwest. He says, simultaneously reifying and challenging hegemonic codes of race, class, gender, and regional or national identity, his characters explore the complex and changing postmodern cultural landscape. So it sounds like he's introducing a real heavyweight here. And then he goes on to say, tracing his performances through a variety of films and theoretical texts, we hope to explain Brad Pitt's multidimensional postmodernity, right? And the problem with what just happened there is that Brad Pitt's acting and his films are very accessible, and so it doesn't suit it to introduce it in that really high-flown, difficult to understand language. So that professor came under a lot of criticism for that. But one thing that we can at least say for what that professor said is that if you really scrutinize that sentence and pay a lot of attention to it and like dig down below the complexity, underlying it is a really meaningful sentence. It says something logical, and we might not think that it's particularly important or like relevant to anything, but at least it has meaning. So how many people have heard of the Sokol affair? Okay, just a couple. So Alan Sokol is a physicist at NYU, and back in the 90s, he kind of had it up to here with that sort of language being passed back and forth in academics. And so he set out to play a trick on the English professors. And what he did was he wrote up a paper using that language that was provably vacuous. It provably had no meaning at all. And he got it published in a highly reputable English journal, Social Text, out of Duke. This was in '96. And so when this happened, it caused a huge uproar because the whole point of Alan Sokol doing that was that he wanted to show that the English professors weren't really speaking like sense. They were just parroting nonsense back and forth at each other. And so like it was in the New York Times, it was a big hoopla. And I guess the physics professors must have felt real smug about that when that happened in '96, because something like that could never happen to physicists because they only deal with really concrete ideas that are justifiable via experiment. And the problem with that line of thinking is that over the years, physics has kind of drifted more towards things like string theory and loop quantum gravity, which are very esoteric concepts, and they're hard to prove and justify. And so in 2002, there was this thing called the Bogdanov affair, And so basically the same stuff that happened to the English professors also happened to the physicists. Now the Bogdanov brothers didn't set out to fool the physicists, they just didn't know what they were doing. They graduated with some PhDs and only like a very loose understanding of physics. And they had four papers published, one of them in Annals of Physics, which is not the highest physics journal, but it is one of high repute. And so this is a quote from one of their papers, and it's really just physics jargon strung together. I don't understand it, but I have it on good authority that it means absolutely nothing in terms of physics. So whereas the English professor's quote earlier at least had some meaning, this is absolutely vacuous, totally useless. So I'll give you my definition for the cloud. I think it's a pretty good definition. I think you'll like it. Third-party, remotely hosted, multi-server applications. And now I want to play a video from Microsoft.
Seriously?
To the cloud.
What?
Check it out. I pulled up the screen from our PC at home. It's like we're right there at the house. Now let's see what recorded TV we have on there.
Oh, Celebrity Probation. Season premiere. Yay, cloud.
To the cloud with Windows Live to create and share anywhere.
I actually really like that commercial, but I don't think it understands what the cloud is. And online, when it came out, there was a big reaction from the internet. And sort of the first level reaction against this commercial was that Microsoft is a bunch of idiots and they don't understand what the cloud is. And that's not really true because there are a lot of brilliant engineers that work at Microsoft. And so if they really want to know what the cloud is, they can find out. And then there was kind of a second level argument, which is that there was a disconnect between Microsoft's marketing department and their engineering department. And the marketing people went off and filmed this commercial, and the engineers didn't have much oversight, and the marketers didn't understand what the cloud was, and they ended up with this thing that they spent a bunch of money on and had to push out. And that's a more charitable explanation, but I don't think that one's quite correct either. What I think that Microsoft was doing with this commercial was they were intentionally trying to deceive people about what the cloud was. So the cloud is the hottest thing in technology marketing right now. And if your product isn't cloud, then you're kind of in trouble when you're trying to sell it. And so there was a very real danger that Windows could become the counterexample to what the cloud is. So if I'm trying to explain to someone off the street what the cloud is, I might start by telling them what the cloud isn't. So it's not anything that you run on your Windows machine, for instance. It's going to be all that stuff that's sort of out on the internet. So there was a very real possibility that Windows could become the counterexample to the cloud. And Microsoft definitely didn't want that because they have to sell cloud stuff. So one thing that you might do to kind of counteract that is try and muddy the definition of what cloud is. So it's already sort of, if you don't pay close attention to it, it's already kind of a nebulous definition. It's hard to pin down. I had to pin it down here in front of a bunch of designers and geeks, right? So if you just give it that little push, you can push it right over the edge into absolute meaninglessness. And I think that's what Microsoft was trying to do with that commercial. So the Flesch Reading Ease score is a simple mathematical formula that you can run on English text to get an estimate of how complex the text is. So the kind of things that it looks at is the number of syllables in a word and the number of words in a sentence. So over on the right, you see things that are very difficult to read, like Ulysses and legalese. And then over on the left are things that are very simple to read, like hop on pop and Paul Graham. And then right in the middle, all these gentlemen up here happen to be my favorite writers, and we'll get to them. So kind of right in the middle there is Time Magazine. And Time Magazine is a periodical that's designed to be read by everybody. So it's a good baseline for something that's legible, something that's readable. So one of the questions that pops into my mind is, how is it that Warren Buffett is 3 points more readable than Time Magazine? Because if you know anything about Warren Buffett, he's practically an accountant. His annual reports are very widely read. And in his annual reports, he talks about things like share prices and mergers and acquisitions and derivatives and all these other things. And so how can you talk about these technical and his field topics and still get away with being more readable than something that's designed to be read by everybody? And the answer to that question is that he invests a lot of time and energy in making his English prose easy to digest. He really puts effort into getting it down to be as simple as possible. And so, like Ben Horowitz, for instance, who scores even higher than Warren Buffett, he speaks about like deep crises in management. And so how do these, and Ben Horowitz is right around where Reader's Digest is, which is even easier to read than Time Magazine. And how do these guys like get all their text like down very simple? They put a lot of effort into it. And it's important to them that they be able to communicate their ideas. And the best way to communicate like difficult ideas is to put it in simple English. So that's what they do. I want to talk now about the person that I think is the greatest artist of the 20th century. That's Pablo Picasso. Inside of Pablo Picasso's works are like the works of 3 or 4 brilliant, greatest of all time artists. But later on in his career, Pablo Picasso kind of started falling off. He was really putting out a lot of quick, slapdash like sketches of faces and nudes and bulls, and selling them for a lot of money and putting them in any gallery he could find. He had a quote which was, "Give me a gallery and I'll fill it," and that's what he did a lot of the time. And so understandably, he came under a lot of criticism. People wanted to see stuff that was of the caliber of his very early works, and instead they were getting these quick sketches of bulls. And so Pablo Picasso's response to these criticisms were that these simple sketches of vases and bulls are in fact worthwhile, great art, and I'll show you. The way that I get to them, it's taken me an entire career to be able to do these quick sketches of bulls, all these thousands of paintings that came before. And I'll show you the process of reducing the old art that I used to do into this new art that I claim is valuable. And so to illustrate his point, he put out a series of plates. These are the first 3 plates. You can see there on the far left is a pretty realistic looking bull. You can see a lot of the bull's hair and his musculature and his hooves and his horns and everything else. And then by the time you get to the right, you start seeing a flatter, more surreal bull, like something that you would see in the Guernica. And after 3 more plates, he's really eliminated most of the bull. There's only a few identifiable characteristics of the bull left. And so this is the final plate, which only contains a few strokes on the paper. And Pablo Picasso claimed that this, in fact, was important and useful art, that it had taken him his entire career beforehand to be able to produce. In fact, I think that's absolutely false. I don't think this is important art at all. The best thing that we can say about this bull is that it's a minimally viable Picasso. This is the simplest thing that Picasso could do that was both identifiable, kind of, as a bull, but also as something that Pablo Picasso had drawn. And then he could go off and sell it or do whatever he wanted with it. Somebody who's a little bit more honest about the way that they market themselves and sell it is Banksy. And this is a bull in a field in England, I assume, that Banksy has stenciled. And I'll read a quote from Banksy that says, "A regular can of paint will give you up to 50 A4 size stencils. That means you can become incredibly famous / unpopular in a small town overnight for about 10 pounds. So Banksy, like even in a way that Andy Warhol had done, he's really combining art with the marketing thinking of the day. So somebody else who used Pablo Picasso's explanation that what they were doing was worthwhile because it had taken them so much effort to get to that point would be Jeff Bezos at Amazon. And Jeff Bezos had this to say about the one-click patent. He said, "We spent thousands of hours to develop our one-click process, and the reason we have a patent system in this country is to encourage people to take those kinds of risks." And so what Jeff Bezos was saying is that the one-click patent is novel and useful precisely because it took them so much effort inside of Amazon. It took them thousands of man-hours and probably millions of dollars, and it was a very risky project. But in fact, any large project inside of any large company is going to carry those same kinds of risks. But that doesn't mean that everything that comes out of a large corporation is novel and invaluable. And the one with the patent is a great example of that. This is something that anybody in the room could come up with, just throwing it together. So let's take a look at somebody who also believes that it's important to invest a lot of effort in getting their products down to something that's very simple. And that's Apple. Like, always baked into the core of their DNA is this notion that you should invest a lot of time and energy in getting things down to their very simplest and making the right choices about the functionality that you include. So I happen to be a big fan of the iPad and the MacBook Air and the iPhone and a lot of their products. And so actually are a lot of Apple's competitors. And in this case, I'm showing side by side a Samsung Galaxy S with an iPhone 3GS. And you can see just the overall look and feel of these phones is extraordinarily similar. The phone icon is almost exactly the same. And that music player icon on Samsung's phone is almost pixel per pixel the iTunes icon from a few generations ago. So understandably, Apple has not been happy about Samsung copying their products. And so they brought suit against Samsung in a couple different courts, California, Germany, I think a few other places. And so as part of these court cases, they've alleged like several different things against Samsung. So here we are back to the iPad from 2010. And if you'll notice along this border of the iPad, there's not much there. There's the home button and not anything else really. And so as part of one of the court cases against Samsung, Apple was prompted to give a list of things that Samsung could do to differentiate their Galaxy Tab from the Apple iPad. And one of those things that they suggested was that Samsung could include borders in their products with substantial adornment. And maybe you can kind of see where this is going. So the problem with that argument is that Apple is claiming that their design patent covers borders that lack substantial adornment. So Apple is sort of making the argument that they have a design patent over something that you're not allowed to patent. Because if you remember earlier in the talk, the only things that you can patent are ornamentation. And so it's worth taking a look at things from Samsung's perspective a little bit. Because Samsung argued that what Apple has been trying to do is patent minimalism. And there's some truth in their argument. And I'd like to go through a few more examples on this. A lot of the things that are included in Apple's design of the iPad actually are things that will be anticipated, or that are anticipated in the design of mobile products. So if we go back to 1994, this is a prototype tablet that the Knight Ridder Corporation put out. Knight Ridder is a news company, and they were testing different things to see like what the future of delivery of news might be like. And you can see that this looks substantially similar to the design of the iPad. It's not a perfect match for match, but it's pretty close. And what's especially interesting about this still from the prototype video is that it shows a man reclining on a couch and reading the iPad on his knee. And if you've done much reading about Steve Jobs and the design of the iPad, one of the things that was crucially important to Steve Jobs and the design of the iPad was that you could recline on your couch and read the iPad on your knee. And in fact, in a lot of the early advertising for the iPad, you'll see people doing just that. Now that's not to say that Steve Jobs saw this video and decided to lift that concept for his iPad. All that means is that this was an idea that at the very least occurred to two very different people, to Steve Jobs and also to the team that designed this tablet for the Knight Ridder Corporation. Okay, so if you remember, the iPad came out in 2010. And 4 years earlier, this is a picture frame that Samsung produced. Now this picture doesn't tell quite the whole story. If you were to look behind the face of it, it actually kind of has like a bulky back like you saw on a lot of early LCD monitors. But the front looks substantially similar to an iPad. And in fact, if I were to take that logo off and show you this picture, you might tell me that what I was showing you was in fact an iPad. If you just go on Google image search and search for TV, Essentially what you see is a big grid of iPads. All you have to do is round the corners and take it off the base. And that's 80–90% of the iPad design right there. So in some ways, it's dangerous to align yourself 100% with minimalism. So it'll never be the case that Lady Gaga and Nicki Minaj come out of their studios having written exactly the same song. And that's because they bring their own sense of style and their own creativity to what it is that they're doing. But if you set out to design a product with minimalism as your only philosophy, then it's very likely that what you're doing is going to look exactly like what somebody else is doing. And it's even more problematic today because people know now to spend that extra energy to go through the process of simplifying a product to its very simplest form. So it used to be that you got this double whammy from pursuing minimalism, of having a product that was easy to use and well designed. But now that everybody knows to sort of go out and hunt for that, you're going to get a product that's easy to use but has really no design. So going forward, you're actually going to have to spend extra effort in coming up with a design that's a little bit more complex than just the very basics. So I want to end with one of my favorite photographs. And this is actually a photograph of Pablo Picasso jumping up in the air and drawing a centaur with a light pen. And this happened in the span of about a second or two with a very long delay shutter on a camera. And I think this is one of the best photographs ever taken, and I think it's very important art. And my question to you is, why do I think that this is important art, but not those very simple bull sketches from earlier? And so you can tell me what you think on Twitter at Kevin Lawler, or you can visit my website at kevinlawler.com. Thank you.